Welcome everybody to my podcast, Big Little Small Talk. I'm Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and I love to talk, but I also love to listen. If you're new here, welcome. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello listeners, my name is Megan O'Hara-Sullivan and you're on Big Little Small Talk. Today I have a couple. We don't usually do couples, but today I have a couple, a very well-known couple in Toowoomba, Kate and Cam Venables. Welcome to Big Little Small Talk, Cam.
Thank you, Megan.
Now, Sunday it is today, and Sunday's your big day because you are...
It is a popular myth that for people in the church, Sunday is the big day. But actually, some days, Sunday is actually not the busiest day because there's a whole raft of things that happens in between times. But obviously, I take at least one service in one parish because I'm the bishop for the Western region.
Okay, so the bishop, yes. So tell me the hierarchy of the church. How does it work?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, there are the laos, which is a word which means the people of the church. So lay people and clergy combined, but the laity are not ordained. Then in the Anglican Church, there are three orders of ministry: deacons, priests, and bishops. And within those, there are various things. You can be a canon or you can be an archdeacon, and each of those have different responsibilities. And bishops, there are regional bishops, and then there are diocesan bishops, and then there are archbishops, and among the archbishops, one will be the primate.
Wow. Yes, now I got lost way back there. But Cam, I wanted to start, because you weren't actually born in Australia, were you?
No, I was born in Belfast.
In Belfast?
Yeah.
So tell me the history. What were your parents doing in Belfast?
Well, my father was Welsh and he was a chemical engineer. My mother was Scottish and she was actually a dental assistant. Ended up becoming a magistrate and doing wonderful things. But through Dad's work, he was working for British Petroleum, and they went from London after they were married to Ireland, and they were there for 9 years, had nine very happy years there. I was born there, my brother was born there, and then the troubles became so bad, we actually moved back to my dad's place in Wales. One of the funny things, those family stories, is that when Mum was pregnant with me, she was prescribed by the doctor half a pint of Guinness every day as an iron supplement, and 2 years later she was prescribed the same for my brother. And then by the time my sister came along, we were back in London, and she went to the doctor for a Guinness prescription, and the English doctor said, no, we don't do that. In fact, we recommend you drink no alcohol at all. So, different kind of piece. And my brother and I blame it on a taste for Guinness throughout our lives.
Is that right? Yes. Well, so growing up in your household, were you a very religious household?
Oh, no, not at all, really. Although I have to say the only time I saw tension between my parents was in the Rugby Five Nations, because Mum was a fierce Scotland supporter, Dad was a fierce Welsh supporter, and Scotland were not very good, and Wales in those days were excellent. So Dad quietly puffed on his pipe and Mum bashed the dishes and felt quite unhappy about things. So there was a sense of religion there. I actually...
The rugby religion,
yes,
you mean?
The
right?
rugby union religion. I got involved with the Scouts, and then there was church parade, and Mum and Dad came along to that, and then Dad would come along to Evensong, and I have these lovely memories as a young teenager of Dad singing in his lovely baritone voice. He was Welsh, loved to sing the Evensong. And then, obviously, I became more involved with the church, and Mum and Dad would come and be part of that. Strangely,
so can I just interrupt you there? When you said obviously you became more involved in the church, why?
I think a couple of reasons. One was a sense of God in the natural world. So we had a big park near us, Oaks Park, and we always used to go to a little cottage in Wales, cliffs, all of that kind of stuff. And I always felt closest to God in that kind of space. And I read a book about Francis of Assisi when I was 15, and clearly Francis of Assisi, wonderful Italian saint, probably one of the best known of the saints, had this amazing sense of being connected to the Creator through the creation. And it was just like, he's speaking my language, really. Trees, cliffs, mountains, that's my kind of space. And so there was that spiritual sense of being drawn to church, but there was also the social sense. So there's a very vital youth group. I was a bit of a larrikin, I guess. So I started a folk group because I thought the organ music was a bit ordinary. And so we had guitars and bass and drums, versus the organ, sometimes working together. I had a very happy, integrated growing up.
Mm. And tell me then and when was it that you made the decision that you wanted to go and that become your life's vocation?
It's a good question. I studied anthropology and drama at uni, and people said, "Oh, what are you going to do with that?" And really, I didn't know what I was going to do with that. Maybe teaching, but I was really passionate about both of those areas. And I think, tertiary study is just the most wonderful opportunity to read and really have a sense of something going on beyond the horizon. And I'd always had a yearning, to live beyond the horizon in that kind of way. So in my last year of uni, my college chaplain said, have you thought about having a gap year between the end of this degree and the beginning of a teaching degree? And I said, oh yes, let's explore that. So I got a job with the Mission to Seafarers in Yokohama, and he suggested that maybe I could do better. So I wrote to the Franciscans, and they said they had just received a letter from the Archbishop of Papua New Guinea asking them to find somebody who could work with young people and music, which was right up my alley. So, and really, PNG is an anthropologist's paradise, just so many different cultures and languages. So I went there and I found and met people who just had this vital faith. It wasn't an intellectual thing, just this deeply heartfelt thing. In very difficult circumstances sometimes, when you're living in a subsistence lifestyle, if your garden fails, it's a big deal because there's no welfare system to help you. So it's really, I think God used this to draw me closer. And I thought, I want a faith like that, and was drawn into a faith like that, where God was not just something abstract, but something was every day. And there seemed to be a right sense of, well, maybe God is calling me to ministry in the church. So that was explored. I actually went back to England, funny story. I went back to England, long hair, long beard, and I worked in a parish there for 4 months. And they said, oh yes, we think God is calling you to ministry. And I went to a big national conference, which is how they do things in England. And the feedback to the diocesan bishop of Southwark was, we don't think Cameron's been living in the real world, because Papua New Guinea is not the real world. And we think he'll respond well to theological education, but not priestly formation. Their recommendation was, please don't laugh out loud, that he should come back to England and get into a job like banking for a few years, just to ground himself in the real world, and then we can reconsider. So I met together with the diocesan bishop, who was kind of appalled at the response. And I said, what does it mean when they say, I won't respond to priestly formation? And he had a bit of a twinkle in his eye. He said, I think that they think you won't toe the line. So he said, what I want you to do is to go back to New Guinea, finish some of that music recording that you were doing, and then come back to us as a youth worker. And while I was back at New Guinea doing the music recording, I met an Australian bishop who said, we actually believe Papua New Guinea is the real world. There are these strong relationships between Queensland and Papua New Guinea. Would you be happy, open to coming down to study at St Francis College in Brisbane? So my life took a different tack, really. And while I was there, same story, through study, you get this broader sense of what God is doing in different parts of the world.
Cam, can I ask you said about the Papua New Guinean people, are you saying that their existence and their belief system, it wasn't so much about religion or God or anything, but it was this kind of our faith in something higher than just subsistence? Is that what you mean?
No, I mean, when I went there, and this is going back to 1986, so it's a while ago, 96% of the population attended a Christian church. So it's a very significant percentage of the population. And that's because different denominations had, colonised that space, really. The Australian authorities had said, really, Catholic Church, you look after this area, Anglican Church, you look after this area, Lutheran Church. And so the churches came in and they offered not only Christian formation and opportunities for worship, but also health services and schools, all of that. So there was that sort of framework. But I think for people who have to carry water, who have to grow vegetables, there is a much closer sense, I think, to being vulnerable and to relying on something which is more than your own strength. We're so fortunate, we flick a switch, we've got electricity, we've got light, we turn the tap, we've got clean drinking water, we go to Woolies, we buy all of that. Whereas I think when you're living in a subsistence kind of space, you're much more aware of how vulnerable life is.
So you went to study in Brisbane. Can you remember that moment where you thought, oh my God, I'm going to do this. I'm going to, become some sort of minister or a priest?
Yes, I think it was a gradual thing. There was a very warm welcome, from the staff of the college and from the other students. And there was clearly a sense of everybody seemed to know somebody who'd been in Papua New Guinea, which was very different to the English context. I think obviously there were some very different cultural things, but you come to terms with all of that. And I think the sort of, just because you go to college doesn't mean you're going to be ordained. You're constantly being assessed. Is this right? Is this going to be right for you? Is this going to be right for the church? And that's a healthy thing, I think, because you don't want to unleash into the church people who are, narcissists or, control freaks, all of that kind of stuff. So there's a whole lot of testing that goes in all of that. And really I had a sense of, if not this, then something else will emerge, really. And the music piece became really important as well. It was really important in New Guinea. Learned to saw really Papua New Guinean musicians taught me to play without music and taught me to sing songs in other languages, and I wrote songs with some amazing musicians up there. And similarly in Australia, I think music helps to build community. So if you can play an instrument half well, suddenly you find yourself mixed up in community and helping a community to dance and to sing and to celebrate and to grieve. And that's a wonderful place to be.
Your parents were still in the UK and are still there now?
Well, both my parents have died.
Mm-hmm.
Dad died before COVID, and so Mum and Dad, for the last 25 years of their life, lived in a little village in between two sheep farms, and in Wales, and it was quite lovely. So when Dad died, I went across for the funeral, and the church was packed, and the pub was packed, and we got kicked out at closing time. It was just a lovely celebration of his life. Whereas when Mum died, she died during COVID, and that meant I couldn't leave as she was dying, and I couldn't be there for the funeral. Only 4 people could be there then, so it was a very grim kind of thing. It was lovely actually. Earlier this week, I called my brother, and he said, "It is amazing that you're calling now." I could hear the wind whistling in the background. He said, "I've just laid flowers on Mum's grave because it's her birthday." It's just the timing of that kind of space. But so Mum and Dad have gone to glory, I'd say.
And your brother and sister are still living in Wales?
Quite correct. My brother is married to a lovely Welsh girl, and he supports England in the rugby union, and she fiercely supports Wales. My sister lives in London, and she supports Wales, and her husband supports England. It's a very curious mix.
Yeah. Well, I don't know anything about rugby, so I can't take you there, Cam. But
it's very disappointing, and I thought we could be friends.
No, that's right. Tell me about what your work involves on a weekly basis at the moment.
I think really sometimes the work of a bishop seems to be a bit of a mystery, and for each of us, there is a common ground. So we have oversight of a certain number of parishes. Within those parishes, there may be one church, there may be multiple churches, and really our role primarily is to ensure that the people who are leading those parishes are doing a good job. There's regular worship.
Laity?
Mixture. So in the Western region, and I have to say I probably have more fun than most bishops, because the Western region starts in Ipswich and goes out to Birdsville. So it's a geographic area about 496,000 square kilometres. So we've got 2 reasonable sized cities with Toowoomba and Ipswich, and then lovely country towns around the place, but then some big properties, cattle and sheep out west. Very few people have the opportunity to move seamlessly through all of those and build a relationship between those. And I think these days we actually have tools that previous generations didn't have. So we can keep in touch weekly through emails, through videos on Facebook, all of those sorts of things. So how do we encourage and ensure good governance in parishes is one piece. For schools that are in the region, we've got 3 schools in this region, so Westmoreland Anglican College, the Glennie School, Toowoomba Anglican School, and I'm also the bishop on the board of Anglicare. So let me tell you, COVID was a hoot in all of that, because we employ now 3,800 people across the footprint of Anglicare.
How much travel do you do into those remote communities?
Not as much as I'd like. So I sort of average about 42 to 47,000 k's a year. But I was reflecting, in fact, in 3 weeks' time, it will be exactly 10 years since I was made a bishop and came into this role. And there's lots to reflect on in all of that. But one of the things that I'm so thankful for is that there are very few roads, the main roads that I travel on, where there are not people I know that I can call in to have a cup of tea if I want to catch up. And that's a beautiful thing, sort of relationship built through time.
What do you find is the hardest thing about your role, Cam?
One of the hard things, because there are a number of hard things, one of them is to find clergy who love serving in rural community space. There are some people who have a bit of a romantic notion about what it's all about, and then they struggle with the isolation. So finding people who are called and gifted to be in those spaces is one. Most clergy really want to make a difference for good, so that's a good thing. That's probably the chief challenge.
So, you say you've been there doing this role nearly for 10 years, so you would have seen drought and floods and fire, and how do you handle that responsibility, or that, I guess, that need that people have for you to be a really strong person in their lives, and that dependence, I guess, that they have, that you're going to bring them hope and faith, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the first 5 years was drought, and it was hard. Meeting with people who were being forced off the land because they'd killed the last of their stock and couldn't say their way out of debt. A number of those really struggled with thoughts of suicide. Surely the world would be better off without me, a sense of failure. So in some ways, part of the role in that time was simply a standing with, standing alongside. And as a man talking to other men, I think there's a real opportunity. But there's also a real sadness when you're, standing in a shearing shed with 6 shoots and it actually hasn't had a clip for years. So the days when things were really going well, drought was a really big killer, feral dogs, really big killer, and the price of wool, really big killer. So I think at the moment things are really good. There's been rain, people are really thankful, but at the same time people are very wise. They know, another drought will come. So I think it is, consistently we draw strength from faith in God, we draw strength from when we read the scriptures, but also I like to think of actually praying with people at the altars of their kitchen table. It's not about just people coming to church and me meeting them there. It's actually going to people's homes and properties and affirming the sacred in their homes and places of work.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I was going to say, do you look around now and just see a sea of grey-headed people and think, what is the future of the church?
I think there's a real mix. Yesterday, sadly, I was in a parish and it was a public meeting to discuss the closure of a church, but the demographics in lots of places in the West has really shifted. There's been this huge migration away. So the people who used to be there are no longer there. Tallwood is an example. Tallwood Station used to employ 120 people, it now employs 6. So the critical mass of people in many of those communities is not the same. But there is another piece, and that is people find community in other places, often in schools, hopefully not in shopping malls, but those sorts of things. So there is a real challenge for the church. But at the same time as having discussions with communities about closing churches, also having discussions with parishes that are booming and thriving. So the church that Kate's part of is actually numerically the largest parish in the diocese. More than 600 go to St Bart's each week. with a whole swag of young people and teenagers, people of every generation. And for some of our ethnic congregations, predominantly South Sudanese, are similarly, young people, teenagers, and people with grey hair like mine.
And mine. Just before I let you go,
I wasn't going to mention that.
The listeners don't know I've got grey hair. About going back to PNG, do you have any aspirations to do that?
I've been asked to go back, and I get asked to go back quite regularly to do some consultancy, troubleshooting kind of space. I think PNG is in a pickle for any number of reasons. Lots of the markers that we'd like to see getting better are not getting better. Corruption is a real issue. Good governance is a real issue. Multiple drug-resistant tuberculosis is an issue. I sort of spearheaded HIV AIDS education, and some of those things have shifted because of medications that are now available. But it's such a shame, because it's a country that its greatest wealth, as most countries are, its people. They've got great natural assets in terms of minerals and oil, gas, fisheries, forestry. But there hasn't been, from the royalties from those things, there hasn't been a reinvestment in education, health, infrastructure. So I think really provinces that should be really going well are not. And so that recent tragedy with the landslide up there, why has there not been a great big response? Well, because the infrastructure isn't there. Yeah.
Is that because you mentioned it about the corruption? Do you think a lot of the money that has been channeled in there has been siphoned off?
Yes, I think there's all kinds of things. Sometimes aid is given, but it's conditional. Sometimes it's conditional on the country giving aid, bringing in its own people. So actually the money actually never leaves Australia or never leaves China, because those things are already done. Sometimes when royalties are paid for particular things, then they go into the pockets of a small number of people. And usually that's dispersed among their family as opposed to the individual, but it doesn't go back to where it should do in terms of local community.
Just got one quick question for you, Cam. I've come here to interview you in your beautiful home, and I know that this is the first house you and your wife Kate have ever owned. Is that?
No, second. We actually bought a house in Rockhampton, a little house up in Marsh Avenue, but we lived in Toowoomba for 6 years, and each of us have got such a sense of joy about living in this community. We could easily see ourselves spending the rest of our working lives here. And beyond, so I said to my boss, can we leave the church house and have that rented out and take a housing allowance so we can buy here? So we bought here, and we're on 6 acres, and I'm happily digging and planting and irrigating, and so it's a beautiful thing.
I guess my mind when I heard that was that you had always been shifted around with your work and never felt a sense of place.
Yes, I think wherever I've lived, I've had a sense of place. So when I die, at the moment in my will, a third of my ashes will go to a little valley in Wales, a third will go to a particular bay in Papua New Guinea, and a third will go to a national park, which we used to live next door to in Rockhampton. But the longer I live here, the more I think it's likely that third for Australia will actually go here on the block to fertilise a few trees.
Well, maybe we can do a quarter.
Maybe.
Cam, I'm going to say thank you for now. I'll get you back, come back in a minute, because we're going to talk to Kate now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back, listeners. You're with me, Megan O'Hara Sullivan, and we're in that podcast and radio program called Big Little Small Talk. And I have here Mrs. Cam Venables, or Kate Venables, and I'm sure she's more than Mrs. Cam Venables. Welcome to Big Little Small Talk, Kate.
Thank you very much. I think I am probably at least Mrs. Kate Venables.
Exactly, yes. We don't have letters addressed to Mrs. Dean Sullivan any longer, thank goodness.
Heavens.
Kate, you grew up in Brisbane.
I did.
Yeah, and your parents, what did they do for work?
So in a space where we sort of keep it in the family, my father was actually an Anglican priest, and so he met my mother as a missionary in Papua New Guinea. They got married, they went to England. I was adopted, my brother was adopted. We came to Australia, went up to Papua New Guinea, and we landed in Brisbane in 1975. And I schooled then all of my primary school and high school in Brisbane.
Okay, Well, there's a lot to explore there. I certainly want to ask about why you seem to have had a parallel life with Cam, but I don't actually think that that was on purpose. So what did you do when you left school?
So I decided that I wanted to save for a car, and being the daughter of an Anglican priest about 1 million years ago, there wasn't much money floating around, so I thought I'd better earn some money. But I realised I also like to spend money simultaneously, so I had to actually take myself away from spending, so I became a housekeeper in Cloncurry for a cattle station. So I saved enough money for a very old, very balmy Datsun at the end of all that. So I cooked for 25 ringers. There was a family of 6 kids, and I was housekeeper, and their mum was the teacher. So I had their 3 little boys, and she had the 3 girls whilst we were, looking after them.
Right, and so you spent a year there. And what did you do after that?
Then I went to uni, and I did the age-old degree where you really do absolutely nothing, which was an arts degree. Then realising I had really done nothing for 3 years, I actually decided that I should do a teaching degree. So I did a dip ed then in the old days before, they became masters.
Mm-hmm. Mm. You said that your father was an Anglican minister or priest. What language am I using?
I think you can use both. Yeah.
How much was your family? How much life revolved around the church?
Well, because my dad's family were all in the UK, and Mum had her parents lived in Brisbane, but they had other siblings that they took a fair bit of care of. So really, our church family was our family. So I grew up thinking, I had about 1 million aunties and uncles, and grandparents were galore, and 1,000,001 cousins. So church was really important in as much as the people were really significant.
Mm. Mm. When you were at school and your friends, were they quite accepting that your father was a minister, or did they give you a hard time about that?
Look, I have to say, I don't really remember getting a hard time, but my brother did tell everyone his father was a plumber. And so for many, many years, and I think people were quite surprised to discover that wasn't the case when he became an adult. So I suspect he might have had a harder time than me. Yeah.
Right. And, so no, you weren't embarrassed about it, or were you proud of that?
Look, I don't know. Was I proud? I mean, I went to a Catholic girls' school for high school, so I probably just explained a lot. Because obviously in a Catholic space, priests don't get married alone, have children, or at least publicly. And so, I guess it was a space of explaining. Probably, I don't know whether pride came into it, but I wasn't not proud, if you see what I'm saying.
Mm. Yeah. When did you make the decision that you were going to go to Bible college yourself?
Well, I finished the arts degree, finished teaching, and then had a thought that maybe I didn't want to teach the kids in a sort of curriculum space, but maybe I was wanting to kind of work with them in that more ministry space, so being a school chaplain, really. So I did a year of training, and then in my second year, we had a youth camp that went up this sort of coast up near Daydream Island, and I decided that I wanted to throw it all away and work on the islands, and I managed to get pregnant, which is probably not what my parents had in mind. And so clearly I did not finish my theology degree then. I did eventually go back and get my master's, but I had a baby by then.
Wow, that's a lot. So how was that? Like, how were your parents about you? What sort of age were you then?
Yeah, so look, I mean, I was probably old enough to know better, I would have to say. I was 23 when I got pregnant, and actually, just turned 24 when she was born. But I was probably in a space where all my friends were at university, so I was definitely the first in a massive group of girls to have a baby, which I think is probably retrospectively quite a blessing, because I had no clue and I had a really good baby. So I just assumed that you're supposed to take your baby everywhere and give your baby away when it cried to people who wanted to hold it, and then take it back when I needed to. So my mum really struggled whilst I was pregnant, but then she came on board the second she held that baby. And Dad was, very English and reserved, and said, "Oh, it'll be lovely to welcome a new member to the family."
So there wasn't any sort of remonstrating on moral grounds or anything like that?
No, really. I mean, my mum did take a bit of time to adjust, but there was some wider, is condemnation too hard? Look, I think people certainly questioned. Yeah.
And were you living at home with your mum and dad?
So I actually went back home to live with them for the last couple of months, because work was a bit hard, just because I had not really obviously finished anything to get a proper job. So I was doing cleaning jobs and that kind of thing, which are great to be able to do. But, I probably just decided that I needed my mum at that point.
Had you explored any of you knew that you were adopted? Yeah, all your life, you and your brothers?
Absolutely, yeah.
And had you ever thought about finding any of your family? And did having a daughter make any difference to that?
I actually tried when I was about 21, but it was obviously I was adopted in the UK, and so there's a whole lot of paperwork you had to fill out, and clearly I was not motivated strongly enough, so I gave it up. When I had a daughter, I certainly thought, or my first child, I really thought I want to do something about this, but I didn't really do anything until I had, I had gotten married. I had 3 children by then, and I think my youngest by that stage was about 6 actually when I decided to do that, and that involved having to obviously fill out paperwork and have an interview with a social worker who was actually based in child safety at the time, so before they released the information. Yeah.
Okay, so we're skipping ahead a little bit there. Tell me what happened after you'd had your first child, and what did you do for work? Where did you go for living and all of that?
Look, I mean, despite the fact that there were some people who probably looked a bit askance, I have to say, the church community was actually really supportive. So I actually went to work for the church. I worked for the diocese. I was part of the children's ministry program. So I worked part-time, and I actually lived at St. Francis College, which is the Theological College at the time. So people were really, really kind and generous. The money was not fantastic, but we did really well.
You had the baby with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I had friends who were really supportive, family were very supportive. I definitely think I am one of the lucky ones in terms of being a single mum without necessarily having lots of money, but lots of people's support and love.
Mm. And who did you meet while you were at
St. Francis.
Yeah.
So I met Cameron there, and that was not a meeting of minds at all. In fact, I thought he was a bit of a twit, and he was going out with one of my best friends at the time. And so basically I dissed him a fair bit for quite some time. We got on very well, but then we would fight, and I would say to my friend, "Why are you going out with him? It's not a good look." Anyway, obviously the universe had other ideas, and
tell me about how the universe had other ideas.
Well, we were still really, to be honest with you, not getting on particularly well. Friends enough, and he had a farewell service. He was going back up to Papua New Guinea, having lived in Australia and gotten his degree. He'd become an Anglican priest, and he had done 2 years of curacy and was going back up to Papua New Guinea. So the night before he was leaving, he had a farewell service, and I went along, and he kissed me. Dirty dog.
So was he still going out with your best friend?
No, that had all fallen over. I think he actually probably had a couple other girlfriends. No, he was definitely single at that stage. So he kissed me, and then he jumped on a plane to flew to Papua New Guinea.
Okay, so there must have been something going on before the kiss, I guess.
I guess so, though honestly, when I look back now, I think we did all of our kind of really getting to know you in a relationship way via letters backwards and forwards from Australia to Papua New Guinea.
Okay, so he went to Papua New Guinea and you started writing to each other.
Well, I started writing to him. He did not write to me as much as I wrote to him, which is possibly not a surprise to anybody else. But I did take umbrage for a while, can I tell you? I wrote many letters, and he was definitely a bit slower. But every time one arrived, I read it thoroughly and decided that I thought there was something there. And when I rang to thank him, so we'd been kind of going out for about 6 months whilst he was up there, I rang to thank him for a present he had sent me for my birthday, which was a funky PNG bag. And he said, "Why don't you come and visit?" And I said, "Okay." And then he hung up, I think, before he could change his mind.
So how old is your little daughter at this stage?
So she was 2.
So what did you do?
So I went up and visited. My mum and dad looked after Gabby, who was our first child, and I went up and I had a fantastic time. I definitely had rose-coloured glasses on because everything was beautiful. I didn't see any cracks in anything living third world. I thought everything was beautiful. But I said to Cam on the last night before I flew out, "I'm a package deal. So if we're going to keep going, it's me and Gabby." And Cam was up for that. So we went back again in February the following year, and I took her, and we had 3 weeks, and everyone fell in love with each other. So I fell in love with Cam again, he fell in love with Gabby, we all fell in love with Papua New Guinea, and we decided that it was going to be a good thing. I was possibly more in love than him because on the second last night before we flew out, we were looking out over the stars, and I said to him, Gabby was asleep, I said to him, so what do you think will happen in the future? And he started telling me about all the plans he had for the youth ministry he was doing in Papua New Guinea. And I said to him, after listening like a very good girlfriend for a while, "Shall I tell you what I think might happen. I said, I think we should get married when you come back down in 6 months' time. And he had a massive asthma attack. And I said to God that night, what happened? I thought we had a deal.
So obviously you weren't too freaked out of getting involved with someone who's an Anglican minister, because your father was.
Yeah.
He's not freaked out about getting involved with someone who's got a baby. You're not freaked out about going and living in Papua New Guinea. So what did you do then?
So obviously it took him some time to come around to my idea, which then became his idea, as all ideas do. And so then we got married when he came down the following year, and we went back up to Papua New Guinea. And the plan had been we would be there for at least 4 years, possibly longer. We stayed 3 because the security situation was pretty bad at that time. And I think that was definitely the right thing to do. From my perspective, the security probably was Cam's role. Not that it was a boy-girl thing, but he took on that space because I really had the kids' health, which in a third world country can be pretty hard as well.
So you'd had more children you'd
That's
had some
right.
kids together by then?
That's right. So Emily came along very quickly, 9 months, but it was pretty quick. And so, having a baby in Papua New Guinea, third world, we didn't, some people live in Papua New Guinea really and have all sorts of help because they come with lots of money. We had no money, so we had no help. And that's okay because that was actually the way most people live. But, not having running water and electricity is not easy when you have a small baby.
But you also had you had disease too, did you not?
That's exactly right. I mean, look, honestly, I was probably I have pretty good health, but both the girls had they had malaria multiple times. They both got typhoid. They had rotavirus. We did our very best never to go to the hospital because you probably got sicker. Sadly, sometimes the reality of third worlds is you just don't have the resources to put into health, which always makes me feel very grateful for what we have here.
Wow, Kate, that's just so much, isn't it? So after 3.5 years or whatever, you decided that you were going to come
back to Australia.
Right.
Yeah.
And how was that a joint decision, or was that with the young family and things? Was Cam's sort of place he always wanted to stay there and help these people, or?
Look, I think that it was a hard decision for both of us to reach, but I think he had absolutely become, his family was so important by then, and he really struggled, as did I, when the kids were sick. So I think it was not a hard decision in terms of being the right decision, but it was hard to say goodbye because I think we felt that we would be saying goodbye to people we'd never see again.
When you went to Papua New Guinea with your parents, what age were you then?
So I was 4.
And do you have much memories of that?
I have very faint memories of it. But whether that maybe played a part then in me finding it easier to go back the second time, I'm not sure. Yeah, but I certainly don't have any negative memories. Like as a child in that space, I don't have any negative memories at all. And my brother was 2 years younger, so he has almost nothing, but I've got a couple. Yeah.
And do you think it's ironic or played any part in the fact that you almost lived this parallel life with what your mother did, I guess?
Look, it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think to that point we probably did. I, though, had the really amazing fortune that when we came back to Australia, I just had lots of opportunities then to get engaged in community. When we were in Lismore, I was working in a school, which was fantastic. We moved to Rockhampton and I started doing some work really in a part-time way for an organisation called Centre Care. And then when I came down to Toowoomba, I worked for Catholic Care. So I think I just had greater opportunities, which might just reflect the times.
Do you feel that with your husband being a bishop, do you feel like he belongs to the people sometimes?
I think that I really admire the fact that Cam has such a strong sense of call and community is such a strong part of who he is. So I think that that desire to serve, whether that's in a church space, whether it's in a broader community space, I think is really inspirational.
I can remember when I first met you, Kate, and you're obviously young and gorgeous and you're married to this tall, gorgeous man, and it just flies in the face of Cam and I were talking about the grey-haired ladies sitting in the church. So I often wonder how the congregation takes you. They go, what? That girl over there is the bishop's wife.
Look, I suspect that, I mean, one of the things about church, I think, is that it just gives you a sense of community. So, and maybe differently, you have similar things where if you go to a soccer community, maybe, or when you go to, I mean, I know the CWA, I guess it's about, I think there's a really strong sense of belonging, connection. I think that obviously the older the congregation, probably the more they love having younger people. But truthfully, I'm a heck of a long way from young now. So I think that it's just about finding your niche and knowing where you belong.
You went on to have another child, a son.
Yes.
And do any of your children have a calling like you or Cam?
Yeah, good question. So our eldest is a teacher at Cannon Anglican College, and so I think she has a strong sense of community and leadership, which is probably two of the things that we have. She is very bossy. Cameron would probably say that's quite a lot like me, and she's actually an exceptionally good teacher. Number two, I think, has a really strong sense of wanting to engage in ground roots community. So she's doing work in Guatemala at the moment and really enjoys engaging in a country that doesn't have some of the infrastructure that we take for granted. And the youngest, well, who knows what that boy's doing really, but I think he certainly is involved in church. So I guess in different ways, all of them have picked up bits and pieces.
You've never had any of them really rebel against the church?
Oh, look, the girls all decided when they were when they were teenagers, they didn't want to come to church anymore. And we sort of negotiated one on, one off, almost the fly in, fly out space. Jack was just part of a church that he really liked. So for him, it was all about the community.
Incredible. All right. Well, I think we might get Cam in and we'll ask you a couple of the questions together and we can hear the story of both of you together. So we'll just pause for a moment. Welcome back, listeners. We're on Big Little Small Talk and we're talking with Kate and Cam Venables, who are in the room together now, and we're going to ask them some questions of each other. Now, Cam, I'm going to ask you to answer for Kate. What would Kate say if I was to ask her in 3 words, I am? What would she say?
Beautiful, intelligent and funny.
You think she'd say that about herself?
Well, she
That's
should
what
say
you
that.
would say about it. Well done. Okay. All right, Kate, if Cam was to answer that question, what would he say about himself?
Hard-working, committed to community, go the extra mile.
And that's not 3 words. That's about 15 or so.
Typical Kate. She just hyphenated all of those ones.
All
I did.
the words together. Kate, if I asked Cam, what would his favourite memory be?
Favourite memory? I think it'd be family. Would it be? I'm going to guess. Into maybe the birth of the first baby.
That'd be his favourite memory.
That's what I think it might be.
Cam, if I was to ask Kate what her biggest fear is, what would she say?
I'm not sure how wide this goes actually, so I need to be really careful how I answer this. Greatest fear would be not being good enough.
Very good. I think that's probably a typical women's answer, if I could generalise. What would Cam say if there was something he always wanted to learn or try?
Cam is always wanting to learn and try new things. At the moment, he's learning Spanish. I think horse riding would have to be somewhere randomly on that list. And probably another language, because I actually think he loves language.
Cam, what would you like to learn and try? Not for Kate, but I'm asking you now.
Spanish, video making, and possibly a novel.
Writing a novel?
Yeah.
What would you write a novel about?
It's a good question. It'd be about people and story and what happened to them through generations.
Good. All right. What's Kate's favourite concert she's ever been to?
She's been to a few, actually.
Is she a Celine Dion type of person?
No.
Or
you have to go further back, actually. So she is...
That's a whack, listeners, if you could hear that.
Yes, but hopefully... Concussion, I'm not driving today. I know it's definitely not Hamilton, nor she particularly liked Moulin Rouge, which is not really a concert, but it was rich with lots of hits from the 80s. She'd see Dire Straits, so that could be a popular one. Yeah.
How did he go with those answers? Do you think?
Actually, I think that was pretty good. Definitely not Hamilton in any way, shape or form.
We didn't like Hamilton.
Not at
Well,
all.
I did. I loved it.
Moulin Rouge was fantastic, but probably Dire Straits and Phil Collins would be the two. I have to go a long way back for my best one ever.
Your best one, the Phil Collins one. All right. So, if I was to ask you, Kate, then what is your favourite memory?
I think it's family. It's definitely family. What is my favourite memory? Gosh, really
Possibly
hard
not the birth of the children.
question. Do you know, I think one of my favourite memories is we were privileged enough to take a trip to the US with all of our kids and and a partner, and we had the most spectacular time in New York for Christmas and New Year's Eve.
It's a favourite memory.
Amazing.
Exactly. Yeah. And Cam, what are the 3 words that you use to describe yourself?
Very good question. Don't really use words to describe myself. I think creative, compassionate, and collaborative.
All the C words.
Yeah, there's something about alliteration. I love it.
It'll be good for when you're writing that novel. That'll be great.
Indeed.
All right, now I ask all of my guests the same question, and it's all about the royals, because I'm a royal tragic. Kate, who's your favourite royal and why?
Gosh, I have to say, I wrote this down because I had so many options. Here's the go. If we're talking Disney princesses, Pocahontas is definitely a favourite. Princess Fiona comes up pretty close on that one. The Crown has given me Princess Margaret. My era has given me Princess Di. But at the heart of hearts, it's Lizzie.
Because?
I don't think we'll ever see a model of service like that again.
And you admire her service?
Absolutely. I think she is inspirational. That I know that she made mistakes, but honestly, there is so much about the way she did leadership from behind, and it was kind of serving, always there, and just able to hold steady in the midst of chaos. Extraordinary.
Lovely. Cam?
Well, I thought we were only allowed to pick one.
Kate seems to have run them all together, joined them all with a hyphen
it's
again.
a lot of hyphens. So I actually, I've recently finished a fabulous book by Simon Montefiore about world history through families, royal families and political families. And even before that, a standout royal leader for me was Sargon the Great. So you're actually going back 4,300 years. He was the first leader of what could be called an empire. So he went and invaded territory in what we now call the Middle East. And I was so moved by that, I've actually got a resin bust of his head in my study as a bit of a reminder, because not only was he the first leader of empire, he was a leader of empire who allowed people to practice their own religion. He didn't try and force people to worship him or worship his state religion. There was this cultural and religious diversity. And I think that is something that was needed back then, it's needed now, really. We don't all have to be the same, and we don't have to be threatened by the gifts of others. We can actually find in them a gift.
See, that's why you're a minister and I'm not. Because you're much more generous of heart than you'll ever find here. Let's hear about the song that can't keep you off the dance floor.
Who's going first?
You can go first.
It's a very hard pick, actually, because I love music. Getting me up on a dance floor is another story, because my version of dancing is really like vertical epilepsy.
Well, I was just going to say you might have a touch of the Peter Garrett's about you.
Yeah,
most definitely.
Somebody's been telling stories, actually.
Oh, no, not at all.
When my youngest first saw Peter Garrett in Beds Are Burning, the video, he said, "Dad, that's like you." And I thought, that may not be great. The singing's great.
That's something to be proud of in my books, yeah.
So it would probably be at this stage today, could be something different tomorrow, a track called Down by the Canadian Frozy Ford, or Santana's classic Smooth with Rob Thomas.
Okay. I'm waiting for Cam to say something that sounds familiar to me.
I know.
All these ancient kings and all these
I could
songs
play
that I don't
Smooth
know.
and you'll go, oh, amazing.
That one.
Yeah.
Okay. Kate, I'm going to put this on. It's going to keep you off the dance floor. Can't
Right.
keep you off the dance floor.
Well, this is somewhat of an embarrassing thing to admit, but it's actually the Communards and Don't Leave Me This Way, because I was a child in the 1980s and that music happens and I want to sit up straight and get to that floor.
Wonderful.
Do you know all the lyrics?
I know a couple of them.
Can you sing them together?
Absolutely not.
All right, folks, we don't get a impromptu karaoke happening here today, but thank you both for telling me your story. It's been lovely to hear and just heartwarming, and I think for the sake of the church, certainly for people like you to be leading it is taking us in the right direction. Thank you.
No, great to have a yarn. Thank you.
Thanks, lovely.
That's it for this week. Thanks for joining me on Big Little Small Talk. I hope you can make the time to join me next week. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favourite podcast app.